Okay, so this is going to be our Visual Studio Code and Node.js setup guide. Some disclaimers here. I was trying to do this without having to get Node.js, but every other guide I saw ultimately got it. I thought that you could do Visual Studio Code by itself and just like program JavaScript directly in the terminal, but the only alternative really was using HTML and embedding the JavaScript. So without further ado, let's hop into this. So here are the slides that I'll be going through kind of quickly, mind you. Some background, downloading it, installing it, creating a project is what we're covering here. So Visual Studio Code is open source, cross-platform, industrial level IDE. You might have heard this before. All I did was took out IntelliJ and replaced it with Visual Studio Code. Great software is great. Open source, cross-platform, that's what we're looking for. So in order to install this, you need to find it on the internet and get the download file. You can click this link to get there. My recommendation, almost as always, is just search for it. So I'm going to do Visual Studio Code. And we see right here is the very first link, but there's also a sub-link, this download Visual Studio Code, which will take you directly to the download page. Realistically, you could have got there with the other link. Here you see your options, Windows, Linux, or Mac. I'm just going to hit this Windows button, and that's going to start my download. Now, I uninstalled Visual Studio Code. I uninstalled Node.js, so that'd be on the same page as everyone. So I'm actually going to go through that, download and install. The other thing that you're going to want, aside from Visual Studio Code, is Node.js. Again, here is a link, but I recommend, let's just look for it. So I'm going to say download Node.js. It's our very first link coming from nodejs.org. And again, you got options on Windows, Mac, there's even the source code, Linux. I'm going to grab this Windows installer here, the 64-bit. I'm not even going to talk about the 32-bit because that's dinosaur. We should be past that by now. That's going to, again, bring up a prompt to save it, download it. Here I'm using Firefox, but almost every web browser is going to download these things to a generic downloads folder. And here you see my downloads are already finished. These are applications, these are installers. There's really no preference on the order that you do these. I would install both, though, before I opened up Visual Studio Code. So let's go ahead and run these installers. You're going to see they're your simple, I accept everything, sell my data, I don't care. This is where it's going to get installed. Sounds great. Sure. Notice I'm not checking or unchecking anything. I'm just going through the default install options. I generally recommend that. Reason being, when you start running into problems, you got bugs, issues, you can search on the internet, and what you're going to find is the vast majority of people also used the default settings. I'm not going to launch just yet, so I'm going to uncheck that box and we'll finish. What I want to do is go ahead and install Node. This is Node.js. This is a JavaScript framework. And again, it is a setup wizard. I accept. This is the default install location. Sounds great. Notice this last one is going to take administrator privileges. Like I said, I had already both these things installed. I uninstalled them so that I could demonstrate this install process. There may be some remnants kind of left in my system. So when we actually go to open Visual Studio Code, we may come across that, and that's okay. And we're finished, or so it says. Let's get our Visual Studio Code, our very first program, going. So I'm using my Windows little search bar to find it on my machine. It's possible that you created a desktop icon along with that, I just searched for it. First thing I'm going to do when I open it is I'm actually going to right click and pin it to my taskbar. I use my taskbar down here basically like it's a desktop. So we'll put Visual Studio Code right there next to my IntelliJ, and it is forever pinned to my taskbar. Here's our welcome screen. Not bad. There's some quick links here. What I'm going to do at this point is create a folder to save all my code in. There's a couple of ways to do that. There's actually an open folder here, which seems a little bit misleading because ultimately what I want to do is create a folder, but that's going to open up a Windows Explorer, and I can actually do it within that. Likewise, I can go to File, Open Folder, and achieve the same thing. So here's my Windows Explorer. I need to find a location where I want to create a folder to save all my code, and I actually recommend a lot of people are going to hate this. A lot of my advanced programmers are going to hate this. I'm right here in the C drive. I'm going to make a subfolder here. I'm going to right click and go to New Folder. I'm going to call that folder CSR for Computer Science Research. I'm doing this for a reason. That reason being is that later on, we may be navigating to this folder by actually typing it out. So I really want that path to be like as short as possible. I don't mean later on in this project, I mean later on in this course. So what this means is I'm going to be able to navigate to this folder under C drive CSR. And that's significantly better than something like C drive users, your username, my documents /CSR. You really don't want to type that out. So normally people don't like it when you create folders like this directly on the C drive, but I'm going with a big brain approach. So I've created CSR. I'm going to open it up and select it. So now this is we're working in this CSR folder from this point on. What I'm going to do is up here, I want to create a new file. You could also possibly hit New File here. You could also probably go to File, New File. The short key is Control-N, so lots of options here. But we're going to create a new file, and you see that it's actually indented a little bit. We are creating this inside of this CSR folder, and I'm going to call it Hello World.js. JS meaning JavaScript. Notice that this little icon here changed the moment that I hit .js. We can have different file types, and so what Visual Studio Code is doing is recognizing that I'm making a JavaScript file, and that file will be created as such, right? Imagine that you could have other languages, right? As we're going to see, something like CSS or HTML files could be in this exact same folder, and what this is doing by giving it that .js extension, not only is that naming the file properly, but it is setting Visual Studio Code into that mode. So it is detecting JavaScript syntax at this point. What syntax are we going to get it? The very famous Hello World. Right? I just want to print off Hello World, and there's not a lot of setup here with JavaScript. We can jump straight to our print command, which is going to be console.log, and in the parentheses, whatever I want to log. In this case, Hello World. Okay, I'm going to end this statement with a semicolon, and I'm not going to talk about the nuance of single quotes versus double quotes, optional semicolons, that sort of thing. I just want to test my environment to make sure it's working. This little white dot up here, you see that? That indicates that my program has had changes to it, or this file more specifically, has had changes to it, and those have not been saved. So before I execute this, I need to save it. The simple thing is to hit the short key, Control-S, but under File, we can see that we have a Save option. So I'm going to save it, and you'll notice that the little dot went away. This file is saved in its current form. I'm ready to execute it. And the way we're going to do that is by going to Terminal, New Terminal. Terminal, console, those are the same thing, right? We're going to launch a terminal, and it's already at this location, right? I'm in C drive, CSR. That is the folder that we're working out of, our working directory. The first thing I'm actually going to do is not execute my program, but I'm going to test to make sure that Node is working. And an easy check for that is to go Node space -v. That's just asking what is my version of Node that I'm currently running. That seems simple, but not only am I executing Node command, by doing so, I'm making sure that Node is installed and is actually working. Because we're actually going to use Node to execute this JavaScript code. The reason that we even got Node is so that we could do this. Otherwise, we're basically taking this JavaScript code and embedding it into some HTML the way it's intended. What Node is allowing me to do right now is to run this independent of HTML. So we're going to execute this by going Node and then just referring to the file name. In this case, it's hello world.js. Notice the case sensitivity. We're going to execute it. And we have a very unmotivated hello world because I did not put an exclamation mark. Why don't we add our exclamation mark? Notice that we made changes, so our white dot appears. I'm going to tell it to save with Control S. I'm then going to run node hello world.js, but instead of typing it out, I'm going to hit my up arrow, and it's going to go to the last command, or actually we could even cycle through commands. So here we have hello world.js, which we're going to execute again, and there it's a bit more excited. This has been our Visual Studio Code plus Node.js setup.